what is debt? Does it just mean the bonds that are issued? Does it also mean appropriations that Congress made? Does it mean entitlements now in the modern era? It's unclear. I mean, there are debates, active debates about this. And what does it mean to question the debt? So, for example, anytime, say, Congress starts spending a lot of money, well, that could endanger, in some future point, our ability to pay it back. Anytime there's a tax increase or a cut, depending on whether you're using static or dynamic economic modeling, that could, at some future time, increase the probability at the margin of there being a default. So there is some question of what exact action constitutes an unconstitutional questioning of the debt.
What does the president have a responsibility to do in the face of an irresponsible Congress or an irresponsible faction of Congress? One possible answer is, hey, Congress, thanks. You gave me all the power in the world. I'll just do whatever I want. All right? But our argument was that the founding principles require the president to do the most modest thing. That's why we call it the least unconstitutional. The thing that Congress could correct most easily, the thing that could be undone most easily, and the thing that would involve the least derogation of legislative authority on the part of the president.
What do you do when a Congress violates the Constitution? You can't impeach a Congress. You can impeach a president. You can't impeach a Congress. So this is nothing that the framers had, really thought about too much. But what happened? They thought about what the president does it, and when the judges would do it, but not the Congress. There's a difficulty because they will have not just violated the Constitution; they will have violated their oath of office. Now, if that happens, the president, I think, can do. I don't think the president can do much until a default actually occurred. Or when a default occurs, the government cannot pay some of its obligations. It makes it more difficult to pay the other obligations. The longer it goes on, the worse it gets. I would think that if that occurred and the violation of the Constitution actually happened, then I think the president is bound by his oath of office to repair the Constitution.
Very briefly, the issue is whether a couple of phrases in the statute which do indicate the interpretation that Jonathan is promoting, namely that tax credits and subsidies would only be available on exchanges which are run by the state. The judge said, yes, those phrases say that, but you don't interpret a big statute by simply taking a couple of phrases in isolation out of context. You have to look at the whole statute, and when you look at the whole Affordable Care Act, you see other provisions which confirm that its text is harmonized with its purpose. Its purpose was to spread health insurance, not to constrict it and not to keep it unaffordable to people who need it. So that basically is the nub of the issue, whether or not the statute or statutes generally should be construed with a kind of blinkered focus on one phrase and then imposing an interpretation of the whole statute by looking just at that one or two phrases, or whether you have to look at the whole statute.
In our government, agencies have no inherent powers, whether you're talking about the IRS, Department of Health and Human Services, the EPA, and so on. These are not entities created by the Constitution. They're agencies created by Congress through legislation. And they only have those powers that Congress gives them by enacting laws that are then signed by the president or in the case of a veto, where the veto is overridden. And so the reason why I think it's very appropriate to look carefully at text and to think that clear text, a phrase like established by a state under Section 1311 means established by a state under Section 1311 is because the ultimate discipline we have on agencies is the delegation of authority to them in the first place. And so we only want the IRS or the HHS or EPA or whatever else to have that authority was actually given. And the only way we ensure that that limitation is there is by paying attention to the source of their authority, which is the text that Congress enacts.
So there has been this debate that goes back to the beginning. Alexander Hamilton and James Madison debated about this during the Washington presidency. There's debate during when the Constitution was being drafted. I think it reflects the competing views of the drafters of the Constitution themselves. The Articles of Confederation had failed. partly, in large part, because the federal government was not strong enough. There was no executive branch under the Articles of Confederation. The drafters of the Constitution were people who learned from experience, and they saw this was a failure. They'd gone too far. They were understandably reluctant to create a new monarch in the United States. They didn't want that. But they also realized we need somebody who can be, somebody in the executive branch. So they created the presidency. And they clearly wanted to make sure the president would have enough authority to carry out responsibilities, including during wartime. That had been a problem during the Revolutionary War, not having one executive who General Washington could report to. But they also wanted to set limits on power. Alexander Hamilton, the drafter who probably was most supportive of a strong executive, wrote in Federal 69, we are not creating a king. So there's been this debate that's gone on throughout since the Constitution was drafted and was present at the beginning itself. And the way I look at it is you have to satisfy both of these competing impulses. How do you give the president enough power to deal with emergencies, to provide for national security along with Congress? But at the same time, how do you set limits?
So I think, I don't care who the president is, I think they're on stronger ground when they talk straight. I think you build up public trust, congressional trust, and confidence. And it's not just Obama. The notion that you can be rhetorical and run around the block with different kind of claims, and then you look for evidence and it's not there. And you can be go for rhetoric and get through primaries and a general election, but when you get in the Oval Office, you have to have some judgments about how your power can be backed and supported, working with Congress, including the other party. There are Republicans he can work with. And you don't get into this claim, I can act unilaterally with plenary power and nobody can stop me. I can act on my own. That's going to backfire. It backfired on Truman. It backfired on many people, George W. Bush. And it's backfiring now.
And I truly believe that during these 50 years, all the Arab countries will go through a revolution because you can't see people living in free worlds and yourself just shut up under a dictatorship. So it's just normal to go through these revolutions. What are we doing? I mean, Tunisia, and I'm talking more about the Arab region. We are answering a very simple question, which is democracy and human rights a universal concept? Because until 2011, the answer was no. No, not because the idea is not these concepts are universal, but the answer was no because all the people around the world, all the religions around the world didn't believe on the universality of human rights. And this is what happened in 2013. Tunisia, when Tunisia voted for this constitution, and we will talk about the core and the articles that we can find in this constitution. Actually, we said to the world that a poor Muslim, small country, Arab, is and want a democracy and wrote a democracy in its constitution. And so by that, we answered the question, and it was a yes. Democracy is a universal concept. Human rights are universal.
First of all, I think we have to realize this is an ownership that they have to have. I mean, this is something that and I think that was the highlight of it shattered this myth that the Muslim world can't be democratic, because this was not an imposed change. It wasn't an intervention, a military intervention that unluckily has happened in times. When we get into the politics of the Iraq War, for example, this came from below. This came from society. It came from grassroots. It came from the demand of the citizens. We want to change our own countries. So this was not something that came out of an imposition, but it was an inspiration from the bottom. What we need to do is help them in their path. We have the experience. I mean, when I first met with Amira and in the meetings we had with a number of other Arab Spring young leaders, I said, I don't want to impose anything on you. I want what you should take from our experience. We've learned from the good and the bad of how we transitioned our constitutions. See what is good for you, and we can help you.